Man, I'm so glad that you're here. I'm excited, as Joe said, for us to be starting this new series. In your seats, if you've never filled one out, there's a little connection card. We'd love for you to fill that out as we kick off this new series. If you need to update our information we have on you, you can fill that out. And you can drop that back there where we have coffee and muffins. We have a gift for you as well. But as we kick off this new series, we're really talking about decisions that we make, questions that we use to make decisions. And we're going to examine a few questions because we believe that the questions we're going to share with you will help you make more God-honoring decisions. And it's closely based off of a book that I read a few years ago called Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. And so some of the insight in what we're going to be sharing with you is not necessarily new to us that we all came up with on our own, but has been influenced by that book. And so we're going to be in 2 Kings today. You may not read a lot of 2 Kings, so this is the best way I'm going to show you where it's at. It's about right there, okay? It's in the Old Testament, the first half of your Bible. We'll also have it on the screens as well. I got to cheat and bookmark it before I got up here today, so I didn't have to look for it for a long time in front of you. But that's where we'll be today. And this series, we're talking about making decisions because after all decisions are big parts of our lives, aren't they? In fact, I was researching this over the last couple of weeks. Did you know that as an adult, this is a little bit mind-blowing, you make 35,000 decisions a day. 35,000 decisions a day. That's a lot. You decide what you're going to eat. You decide what you're going to wear, what you're going to watch, where you're going to go, where you're going to sit this morning. You decided. In fact, somebody told me, hey, we sat here just a minute ago. This was my decision. They made that decision. You decide who you're going to talk to, what you're going to buy, what you're not going to buy. You decide how you're going to exercise. You decide if you're not going to exercise. You decide if you're going to speed up at the yellow light or slow down. Who in here is the speed up crowd? That's my kind of church. I knew we were friends. You decide if you're going to take your kid to practice. You decide if you're going to skip practice. You decide if you're going to answer that phone call. You decide if you're going to text that person back. You decide if you're going to like that social media post. Like the list goes on and on. It's 35,000. And many of these that our days are filled with, sometimes we don't even realize we're making them. We just make them intuitively. Our instincts just make them. And a lot of them are not big deals. But many of the decisions that we make, many of the decisions that you make are in fact huge deals. They're a really big deal. And we are very aware that we are making them because they have a long-lasting impact. We know we are making this decision. And here's what we all know. You all know this about your decision. I know this about my decisions, is you control your decisions, and your decisions determine your outcomes, right? You're in charge of your own decisions. You control that. But then the decisions you make determine the outcomes you're going to receive. You are in charge about the decisions you make about your marriage. But those decisions determine the outcomes of your marriage. You decide, you make the decision on where and what you want to spend money on, but that decision that you make determines your financial status. You make the decision, but the decision determines the outcome. You control those decisions. And we all filter these decisions, all of us. We have different filters that we make these decisions through. Many of you may know this time of year is the time that you get out. It's kind of a square. It's called an AC or an HVAC filter, right? It says it'll have numbers on the side, 25 by 20 by 1, something like that. And you're supposed to change that every 3 months. Some of you change that every 3 months. Some of you, once a year comes around, you change it. Some of you right now are thinking, we're supposed to change that thing? Like it's never been changed. Yes, you are supposed to change that thing. And it's not the only thing that has filters. Your car has a filter in it. Your lawnmower has a filter in it. Lots of things have filters in it, and they determine what they're going to allow through, but more importantly, they determine what is going to be kept out. They have a filter, and you have a filter too. Now, it's not like the one you put in your HVAC, but it is a filter that you run every single one of your decisions through. One of your filters may be time. You may filter a decision about something through time. How much time is this going to cost me? If it's an hour, then yes, I'll do it. If it's a day, then no. If it's a month, definitely no. Some of you, your filter may be money. How much is this going to cost? I have a financial plan. We live on a budget, and so I need to filter this decision through cost. It's something that you filter through. Others may filter through other people's opinions. Like I'm going to decide whether I do this or not, whether I buy this or not, whether I say this or not, because my number one filter is what will other people think about me? Will they like me if I do this? And if not, then I'm not going to do it. It's a filter that you run something through. Your filter may be, is it healthy? Your filter may be, is it profitable? We all have different filters that we use at different times in our lives. And in this series, we want to give you a question to add to your filter. That's all we want to do. We're going to give you a few questions. Each week, we're going to give you a question to add to your filter to help you make better decisions, because we truly believe that these questions will help us. We believe it will help you. We believe it helps our church to make decisions that bring honor to God. And really, if you think about it, questions are how you make decisions, aren't they? That's how you decide whether or not you're going to do something. It's not through anything else. It's through questions. When you think about the decisions you've made, most of the time, you've asked questions. Maybe it was one of the questions I just shared earlier, but we all ask questions, and there's kind of some default questions that we all ask. Like your question may be around finances, and mine may not be. Your question may be around health, and somebody else's may not be. But we all kind of have a default set of questions that we go to when we make decisions. And here's a few of those default questions. Will this make me happy? We ask that in our lives. Is this going to make me happy? Do I want it? Right? That's it. That's a filter that we run our decision making through. Can I afford it? Will anyone find out? Those are some just default questions that we ask when we make a decision. But the truth is, these are actually horrible questions to ask before you make a decision. Right? They're horrible questions to ask for us to filter our decisions through. We need better questions, and here's why. Here's why we need better questions. It's because the easiest person for me to deceive is me. The easiest person for you to deceive is you. We are good at lying to ourselves. See, bad decisions in others are really easy to see, aren't they? We know when somebody else is making a decision. Like, we talk about it. I mean, we usually whisper about it, but we talk about it. We know that a bad decision is being made. But did you know what the common denominator for every bad decision in my life is? You can say it. It's okay. It's not going to hurt my feelings. It's me. Yeah. I'm the common denominator. And guess what? I'm going to let you in on a secret. You know what the common denominator is on every bad decision you've ever made in your life? Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty simple, isn't it? We've nailed this down today. We deceive ourselves. Those bad financial decisions, those bad relational decisions, those bad professional decisions. Sure, other people spoke in. They may have given advice, but ultimately you made the decision to buy it. You made the decision to leave them. You made the decision to love them. You made the decision to start this new thing, to stop this new thing. You are the one who made the decision. I've talked myself into every bad decision I've ever made because I easily deceive myself, and so do you. Now, I'm not trying to make you feel guilty. That's not the point today. I just want us to be on the same page of understanding how big a role decision-making is in our life, and that we are ultimately the ones making them, and we deceive ourselves. And sometimes it takes a while for a decision to play out. Sometimes we regret a decision immediately. Right? We wish instantly that we hadn't said that. Anybody ever been there? Like as the words are leaving, something in your brain is going, why are you saying this right now? And you just keep talking and talking? That's immediate regret for that decision. We immediately regret that we ate that we bought that we committed to that. And if you asked one of those questions we talked about earlier, does it make me happy? Do I want it? Can I afford it? Will anyone find out? The chances that you either immediately or later on regretted that decision are pretty high. Because our decisions determine the outcomes of our lives. So with that understanding, like we're all on the same page. Will you agree with me that we all make decisions every day? You're about to make a decision right now. Yeah. Some of you are like, I'm not deciding. You decided, though, that you're not deciding, okay? Yes, we make decisions every day. So what if we could help prevent bad decisions from ever or rarely happening in our lives? Even if we could just improve it a little bit, it would be a good thing. Proverbs 27:12 tells us this: a sensible person sees danger and takes cover. And the inexperienced keep going and are punished. In other words, what he is saying here is that a wise person sees danger down the road. They see the long-term effects and they change their decision. They make the best decision. But a foolish person, not so much. They really only think about right now. And they just keep going ahead. Another way of saying this is, what do I want most over what do I want now? What do I want most over what do I want now? When we make decisions based on what we want right this second, they're usually poor decisions. We're going to talk more about that next week. But all of these questions that we're going to give you each week are going to help you avoid danger. They're going to help you stay away from immediate regret. They're going to keep you from making emotional decisions. Because here's what I believe about you. Because you're smart people. Okay, you're smart people. I've been in other churches, and I couldn't say that. But this church, I'm saying that. Okay, you're smart people. Here's what I know about all of us to be true. No one plans to complicate their life by bad decisions. But most of us don't plan not to, right? Like most of you, I think maybe even all of you, do not get up and think, how can I mess my life up with bad decisions? But maybe few of us ever say, do I have a plan to keep me from making bad decisions? And we just let life happen. And so here's the question we're going to start with today. Am I really being honest with myself? Am I really being honest with myself? And we say it like that because just like we've talked about, we're great at deceiving ourselves. We are great at lying to ourselves. We can convince ourselves of anything. We can justify anything that we need it. We can justify, hey, he's not that bad of a guy, not that bad of a girl. We can justify, hey, it's just one tournament away from church, from our mission groups. It'll be okay. Hey, I can justify. I can control my anger. I can stop whenever I want. I'll start tomorrow. We can justify to ourselves just about anything. But if we want to make decisions that honor God, we have to be honest with ourselves. In other words, we have to tell ourselves the truth, even if it makes us feel bad about ourselves. Right? We have to tell ourselves the truth, even if it makes us feel bad about ourselves. And we don't like to do that, do we? We don't like to tell our things that make us feel bad about ourselves. But to make the best decision, we have to be really honest with ourselves. Because here's why. If we're not honest with ourselves while we're making the decision, when it goes poorly, when it falls apart, when it goes bad, when we have regret, we will not be honest with ourselves as we evaluate why it turned out that way. Right? We won't be honest with ourselves. It'll always be the other person's fault. It'll always be the job's problem. It'll be the kid's fault, the boss's fault, society's fault. If we lie to ourselves when we make the decision, we will lie to ourselves as to why it was a bad decision. And so we'll never change. We'll stay in this circle of bad decisions. If you're not committed to being honest with yourself, if you're not committed to that, if you start justifying why you make the decision you make, you'll never get out of a cycle of making bad decisions. So, as you make decisions in life, as you are approaching new ventures in life, if you find yourself having to justify, having to convince yourself, you should probably just press pause. You should probably just stop for a minute. I'm not saying don't make the decision, but if you're constantly having to say, well, I really think I should do this. I really think I should get this. I really think I should buy this. I really think I should be with him. And you're having to talk yourself into it. I want to encourage you just to press pause and ask, why are you really doing this? Why are you really starting this new job? Why are you really diving into this relationship? Why are you really buying this? Why are you really putting that off? Just pause and ask yourself, why are you really doing this? Because our decisions matter. And when we rush, when you rush, when I rush, we deceive ourselves and when we don't ask the right questions, the questions that we're going to see here in just a minute, it has consequences in our life and those around us. So we're going to learn about a story today. You may not be familiar with this, and that's perfectly okay, but it took place in about 600 BC. So it was a long time ago, before most of you were born. And so it's in the Old Testament. There's a prophet named Jeremiah. Sorry. There's a prophet named Jeremiah, And a prophet was the way that God spoke to the nation of Israel. He spoke through the prophet, okay? They did not have the fullness of God's word like we do today, and he would speak through the prophet, and the prophet would at one point rule the nation, and then at a later point he would be the advisor to the king of the nation. He would be the voice of God to that king, and so that's what Jeremiah is, and we're going to see in this story he was a prophet to several kings, none of which ultimately took his advice. And this story takes place in Judah, which is the lower half of Israel. Israel had been then split into two nations, and this is in the lower half, and it begins in 2 Kings 23. It says this: Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zebediah, daughter of Pedaiah. She was from Rumah, and he did what was evil in the Lord's sight, just as his ancestors had done. So it gives us the names of family here because it wants you to know, hey, this is a real person. Go look them up. There's history here. And then he goes on in 2 Kings 24, and it says this: during Jehoiakim's reign, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon attacked. And Jehoiakim became his vassal for 3 years, and then he turned and rebelled against him. So Jehoiakim is a young king. I mean, I don't know what you were doing at that young age of 25, but ruling a nation is probably not on your list of things, right? He's ruling a nation. He's a young king, and Judah is not in a good place in its history. And so they find themselves paying tribute to Babylon. That's what that means when it says it's a vassal there. Babylon was one of the most powerful nations in the world at that time, and so Judah paid to Babylon so that they could have military support. They paid kind of a tax so that they could govern themselves. And really more than anything, they paid so that Babylon would not come in and attack them and take them over. And so they had been paying for 3 years, and Jehoiakim, who's this young king, decides, I'm not paying them anymore. I'm the king, and I want to keep my money and do things my way. And even worse, he then says, I'm going to start working with Egypt, which was an enemy of Babylon. They were two of the powerhouses. They were always fighting. And so Jehoiakim says, I'm not paying Babylon. Not only am I not paying you, I'm going to start working with Egypt. And Jeremiah hears of this decision. And as the prophet of God, as the advisor to the king, he goes to him and says, this is not the right decision. You should not do this. This is going to end poorly for you and for Judah. This is a really dangerous decision. Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, is not going to allow this to happen. But Jehoiakim was king. And when you are king, guess what you get to do? Whatever you want to do. That's exactly right. And that's what he did. He did not listen to Jeremiah. He didn't have to as the king. And he had long stopped listening to God and done what he wanted. Have you ever wanted an I told you so moment? You ever had one of those where you gave somebody advice, they didn't take it, and maybe you did or didn't, I'm not going to ask you to admit, but you just had in you this moment of, I told you so, right? And that's kind of how we all say it, you know. It's not usually in a loving, kind way. It's in a pretty snarky voice, isn't it? It's like right now in your head, you're saying it in your snarky voice to yourself. I can hear you doing that. I told you so, right? Jeremiah has one of these moments because sure enough, Nebuchadnezzar does not like not receiving the money from this nation. And so he comes to Judah and he attacks Judah. And he puts King Jehoiakim in chains, marches him back to Babylon as part of King Nebuchadnezzar's collections. Now, I grew up as a kid, I collected baseball cards. That's what I like to collect. My daughters right now are collecting keychains. Anytime we go somewhere, we go in a store, in a gas station, on vacation, they want a keychain. They're collecting these keychains. And all of us probably collected something growing up. Anybody, this is going to be a little crowd participation. Anybody collect anything when you were a kid or now? What'd you collect? Tell me something. Pokemon cards, yeah, okay. What else? Baseball cards, anything else? What? Pogs. Okay. No judgment here, man. No judgment. That's not as cool as baseball cards, but not as dorky as Pokemon. It's in the middle. It's one of those things I shouldn't have said. Anybody else? You collect something? Beanie Babies, the little, they all had little names. What about now? Anybody collecting anything now?
Coffee mugs.
Coffee mugs, yes. Like we don't have room for dishes because we've got too many coffee mugs. Anybody else? Anything? State magnets, all right. Man, we all need to go on vacation together, I think. We would just tear 7-Eleven up with stuff. Yeah, we collect things. Well, Nebuchadnezzar was no different. If you read this story, he actually collected kings. Now, this is hard to collect. You know, you don't find them on the little twirly stand at the local gas station. That's not where they are. But he collected kings. This is harder to collect. But if you read his story, wherever he went and conquered a nation, he would take that king, he would poke their eyes out, he would blind them, put them in chains, keep them alive, and whenever he had a party, whenever he had an event, he would literally, I'm not making this up, you can read this in history, bring his collection of kings out in a chain. And he'd show them to everybody. Be like, hey, oh, you got Pokemon cards? Look at my kings. That's what he collected, which is what happens. We see it happen here again. Before Nebuchadnezzar leaves Jerusalem, he crowns Jehoiakim's son, Jehoiachin. They weren't super creative with names. They crowned him king. Jehoiachin was 18 years old. And when he became king, because his dad had just been added to Nebuchadnezzar's collection, he reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. And he did what was evil in the Lord's sight, just as his father had done. So Nebuchadnezzar comes in, he takes Jehoiakim, he blinds him, he adds him to his collection, he places his son in charge, and after 3 months, he changes his mind, goes back in, takes Jehoiachin and adds him to his collection and puts someone new in charge. In 2 Kings 24:17, it says this, and the king of Babylon made Mattaniah, Jehoiachin's uncle, king in his place, and changed his name to Zedekiah. And Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And Zedekiah did what was evil in the Lord's sight, just as his father Jehoiakim had done. Jehoiachin had done. All of the kings before had done. You see a pattern developing here? There's a pattern of poor decision making here. And he didn't know, Zedekiah didn't know what none of them knew, that he was going to be the last king. If you read in 2 Chronicles, which is another account of this story, 2 Chronicles 36:12 says, he did, this is talking about Zedekiah, what was evil in the Lord, inside of the Lord his God, and did not humble himself before the prophet Jeremiah at the Lord's command. Jeremiah had a front row seat for all of this. And this is saying that he refused to listen to Jeremiah's advice. Jeremiah's like, listen, bro, I've seen this play out. I've been here before. I know what happens. And Zedekiah, like the kings before him, ignored him. And he thought, hey, I can make this decision and I will be different. We don't have time to read it this morning, but I would encourage you in Jeremiah 38, you can read the rest of this story. But Zedekiah is so tired of hearing Jeremiah saying, dude, don't do this. Do not stop paying tribute, because he reigns for a little while. He pays tribute for a little while, and then he decides to stop. And Jeremiah's saying, I've seen this. Do not do it. This is not what God wants you to do. And Zedekiah gets so tired of hearing him say it that it says it puts him in puts Jeremiah in a large cistern, which is just this big pot that they collected water in. It's empty, and they put Jeremiah in there just so he can stop listening to him, just so he can kind of get rid of him. Right? Like, I don't think we can do that today with the people we don't want to hear from anymore. But when you're king back in those days, you're like, hey, go put him in that flower pot, okay? I don't want to hear his voice anymore. And that's what he does. And then, of course, Nebuchadnezzar comes and says, hey, I want my money. And he begins attacking the city. And Zedekiah, guess what? Changes his mind. And he calls to Jeremiah and says, hey, I've changed my mind. I want to listen to you and God. And Jeremiah says, man, I've been in a pot for a few days. It's too late for that. Right? That's not what's going to happen. And so Zedekiah tries to sneak out of the city. And as we know, Nebuchadnezzar collects what? And what does he see running away from the city? A king. And so he goes and finds this king. And look at 2 Kings 25:7. They slaughtered Zedekiah's sons before his eyes. And finally the king of Babylon blinded the last thing Zedekiah ever sees is the slaughter of his family. Which makes me think, I'm so glad that none of you collect anything other than Pokemon and baseball cards. That's all the end of Zedekiah's life. And I know that's a lot of story, but it's important for us to understand this story. It's important for us to see that over and over again, these kings, these leaders were making the same horrible decisions in spite of advice from Jeremiah. In spite of counsel from Jeremiah, who was saying, this is not a decision that is going to honor God. God does not want you to make this decision. And maybe we would say, to the first king who decides, hey, I'm not paying Babylon, and he gets added to the collection, maybe we would sit back and go, well, he didn't know that was going to happen, right? Like, man, that's tough luck, but he didn't know. But the second one, and then the third one, right? Eventually you kind of go, hey, man, this is a pattern. This is what continues to happen. Why are you making this decision? And we do that in our lives today, don't we? It's very similar to this story. We see stories like this in the lives around us where people continue to make the same decision. Or they make a decision that they know somebody else has made, and it plays out poorly, and we can't help but think, why did you do that? Right? Why are you doing that? What were you thinking? How could you be so clueless? How could you be so deceived? Everybody knew this was going to play out that way. Why were you deceived about it? And that's really a great question. How does such a bad decision get made? Why do people deceive themselves? Well, fortunately for you and for me, Jeremiah had a front row seat. And I think he answers this as he evaluated each king and their decisions. He answers the question. He tells us why we are good at making such bad decisions. Look what he says in Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is more deceitful than anything else. Your heart, my heart, is more deceitful than anything else. And the word he used here is not by mistake. It means it's intentionally trying to trick you. It's intentional about it. It's more than just being dishonest or misleading. It's deceitful. That means, hey, your heart knows what is right to do, and it's going to try to get you to do something else. It's going to lead you to do something else. And that's really a pretty bold statement for him to say, right? That it's more deceitful than anything else. He could have said, listen, your heart, top 5 deceitful things, right? It's in the top 5. There's the con man who's in jail. There's the timeshare salesman tricking you on something, right? There's the 4-year-old, who didn't eat the cookies. They're deceiving you. They ate the cookies, right? And then there's your heart. But no. Jeremiah says, your heart is more deceitful than anything else in your life. And the truth is, we know this, don't we? I know this about me. You know this about you. We know this about ourselves, that something inside us begins to deceive us. Begins to tell us, hey, you'd look nice riding in that, right? Begins to tell you, hey, you deserve to defend yourself. Did you hear what they said about you? It's okay for you to go after them. Your heart begins to tell you, hey, I'm not sure she really loves you anymore. Your heart deceives you. The heart is more deceitful than anything else. But it doesn't stop there. Jeremiah had a front row seat for all of this. He says, the heart's more deceitful, and there's an and, like that would have been enough if that was the only statement, right? Your heart's just horrible. But Jeremiah, he's just being honest. Your heart's horrible, and it's incurable. Now, this is not what I would have expected him to say. I would have expected him to say, hey, your heart is deceitful, so make sure you take care of your heart so that it won't be deceitful. Or trust in God so that your heart never deceives you again. But that's not what he says. He says your heart is deceitful, and guess what? There's no cure. It's always going to be deceitful. A deceitful heart is permanent, which means this: you can never ignore the status of your heart. You can never ignore the status of your heart. You can't say, hey, I'm 50 now, my heart's good. You can't say, hey, I got married now, I can listen to my heart. You can't say, hey, I go to church almost every week, my heart is good to go. No, your heart will always have a bent towards deceitfulness. And you and I must constantly monitor our hearts. And one of the ways that we can do this is by asking the question, am I really being honest with myself? Or am I letting my heart deceive me? Jeremiah finishes up saying something that we've all said in verse 9. He says, the heart's more deceitful than anything else and incurable. Who can understand it? Who can understand it? Haven't we all said this before? This is the way we say it. When we say it, we say, I don't know why I did that, right? I don't know why I made that decision. I don't know why I bought that. I don't know why I left there. I don't know why. I don't know why. We've all lived out what Jeremiah warns us about centuries ago, because those people and us, our hearts are deceitful. And the easiest person to deceive is ourselves. Unless, if there's hope at the end of this story, unless we force our hearts to be honest, unless we force our hearts to tell us the truth, because we know this, and we know that God knows this about all of us. What's said in Proverbs, a fool's way is right in his own eyes, but whoever listens to counsel is wise. In other words, a fool only listens to his own heart. A fool only listens to her own heart. So how do we make decisions without deceiving ourselves? How do we make decisions that line up with the Proverbs 27 that we looked at earlier, where we look long-term at the decision instead of immediately right in front of us? How do we make decisions that help us to be the person that God is calling us to be, that the Bible is teaching us to be? It really begins by us asking the question, am I really being honest with myself? We have to ask that question. So let me ask again, are you really being honest with yourself about that purchase? Are you really being honest with yourself about why you're thinking about a divorce? Are you being really honest with yourself about why you want that job? Are you being really honest with yourself about why you always react that way? Are you really being honest with yourself about why you won't have that conversation with that person? Are you really being honest with yourself? Here's why it matters. This matters because just like with King Zedekiah, it matters because your decisions rarely, if ever, only impact you. Your decisions rarely, if ever, only impact you. This King Zedekiah made the wrong decision, and all of his family, in fact, his entire nation, suffered because of his decisions. Decisions are often made in private, but they almost always play out in public. Hear me say that. Your decisions are often made in private, but they almost always play out in public. You know this. You know the private decision you've made in the past has impacted others in public. So what are we asking you to do with this question? We're asking you to think about the decision before you make it, not after. We're asking you to think about down the road and how it will affect others and why you're really making that decision before you make it and not after. We're asking you, are you really being honest with yourself? Here's the other reason it matters, is because what you want most is rarely what you want now. What you want most is rarely what you want now. But we'll save that for another week. Let me give you a few questions to think about as you go to lunch, as you go home. Where do you struggle most telling yourself the truth? We all have an area of our lives that we are bent towards deceiving ourselves more than others. So it starts here. What area of your life do you struggle the most with telling yourself the truth? Here's the next question for you to think about. Is it possible that the fear of being honest with yourself is keeping you from telling yourself the truth? Is it possible that you're just afraid to be honest because you know that it will bring up something, that it may cause you to have to do something, to say something, to be something that you're afraid of? And so instead of facing that fear, you deceive yourself. Is that a possibility? I don't know. Here's the last question for us to think about. Will you be honest with yourself, even if it makes you feel bad about yourself? Will you be honest with yourself, even if it makes you feel bad about yourself? Because here's what I know.
You'll need to turn off airplane mode.
Siri wants to inject into this message as well. Here's what I know is if you're unwilling to feel bad about yourself in the moment that you're making a decision, then more than likely, at some point down the road, you're going to feel bad about yourself because of the decision. So why not? Why not be honest with yourself? It may invite some pain. It may invite some conversations. It may invite some hurt into the front end of the decision so that you can avoid that on the back end of the decision. And one of the best ways that you can guard your heart, that you can pay attention to your heart, that you can keep your heart from deceiving you, as Jeremiah tried to tell these kings, and he tells us, is to ask yourself, are you really being honest with yourself? Let's pray together. God, we love you, and we thank you for your son, Jesus. And so, God, I pray that anyone in this room today that does not have a relationship with Jesus, that they would be honest with themselves right now, that they would stop deceiving themselves, that they can figure it out, that they can be good enough, that they can earn their way in eternity, God, but they would be honest with themselves, that they need a Savior, and that they would know that, God, you sent your son Jesus to die on the cross for their sins, and he rose again so that they could have a relationship with you. And so today I pray, God, that if someone is here and has not made that decision, today would be the day they do that. And then for those in the room who have already surrendered their life to you as their Savior, I pray that you would help us truly be honest with ourselves. I pray that you would help us take the words of Jeremiah about our heart, take them seriously. That we wouldn't lie and say, I understand what he said, but that's not me. That doesn't apply to me. I've got this under control. No. I pray that we would take it so seriously that our hearts are constantly deceiving us. They will always try to deceive us. And so that we would be honest in every decision we make, and we would begin by asking the question, why am I really doing this? Am I really, really being honest with myself? God, we want to ask that because we want to be a church and we want to be a group of devoted followers to you who make decisions that honor you, that bring glory to you, and that allow us to live our lives the way that you have intended. So help us this week to be honest with ourselves. In your name I pray, amen.